I'm Ken. So imagine you're playing in an in-person Magic tournament. You sit down to play your first match. Now, on your opponent's first turn, they cast this spell. Not a problem, right? Now imagine instead that on their first turn, they cast this spell. Problem, right? According to Magic's tournament rules, players may not create their own proxies, and this Grim Monolith is clearly a proxy. The tournament rules go on to say that this kind of proxy is not an authorized game card. Authorized game cards are, and I'm reading from a screen here, are cards that unaltered meet the following conditions. The card is genuine and published by Wizards of the Coast. The card has a standard Magic back, is a double-faced card, or is a card that is part of a meld pair. The card does not have squared corners. The card is not a token card. The card is not damaged or modified in a way that might make it marked. The card is otherwise legal for the tournament as defined by the format. So maybe this card could be considered an authorized game card since it's really a basic land. Or maybe we could call it an artistic rendition of a Grim Monolith. The same rules say artistic modifications are acceptable in sanctioned tournaments provided that the modifications do not make the card art unrecognizable. Well, there's the problem. There's no Grim Monolith on this authorized game card. What about now? Any Magic judge on the planet would look at this and say that this is an unauthorized game card, that this is an unauthorized proxy, and its owner would probably be warned and maybe even penalized. But that's tournament Magic. And I don't really care about sanctioned tournament Magic. I care about Commander, both casual and competitive. So now imagine that you sit down with your friends to play a game of Commander. During that game, one of your opponents casts this Grim Monolith. Whether or not that's a problem will most likely depend on your play group, because opinions about the appropriateness of proxies vary person to person. Maybe your opponent, your friend who cast this Grim Monolith, is new to your play group, so they ask, can I use proxies? In my mind, that four-word question represents Magic and Commander's relationship to class. This is an essay in 3 parts. In order to talk about class, we've got to talk about material conditions. Now, a lot of this will sound obvious, but just because reality is obvious doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. Wizards of the Coast is a corporation owned by Hasbro. To understand Hasbro, we should understand who owns it. About 80% of Hasbro's shares are owned by institutional investors, meaning firms built to make their clients, the investors, more money. The institutional investor, the biggest slice of Hasbro, about 14%, is Vanguard, and about 12% is owned by BlackRock. So let's get to know Vanguard and BlackRock. In the last 45 years, Vanguard gained control of 2% of the entire world's capital. So 2% of all the money organized to make more money, controlled by one corporation. At that scale, you would think that Vanguard would be a household name. It's not. You'd think that Vanguard would be under a lot of public scrutiny. Not really. Okay, but I bet the Wikipedia article is super long. Oh. The Wikipedia article for Vanguard is about 2,200 words long. You know what's 50% longer than Vanguard's Wikipedia entry? Mark Rosewater's latest article. Okay, let's talk about BlackRock. Other than sounding like a military operation from a Michael Bay movie, BlackRock also manages about 2% of the world's capital. Now, what's all that money invested in? For one, oil, coal, and gas reserves that in 2018 produced about 9.5 gigatons of carbon dioxide, meaning BlackRock was, in 2018, funding about 30% of the entire world's CO2 output. 30%, one firm. To be fair, Vanguard was responsible for about 25%, so... Okay, let's return to Hasbro. Now, I'm not spending like 50 hours making this video just to say that Hasbro, a big corporation, is part of an economic system that's destroying the conditions for human life on Earth. That's obvious. What I am trying to show is that Hasbro is owned by capital, and that the first principle of capital is that ownership determines value. And I'm trying to show that this principle influences nearly all of our beliefs, even our thoughts about this. The question of whether or not someone's cool with proxies hinges on our convictions about small pieces of cardboard. Some folks want to play Magic using only authentic cards, cards that they've spent money for or cards that they've traded into, maybe like this one. Others would rather write Grim Monolith on a basic land rather than pay, $250 for a real one. The first group values particular pieces of cardboard, and more importantly, they believe that there is a proper way to relate to that value. Ownership defines that relation. The other group, by transmuting a basic plains into a Grim Monolith by way of a Sharpie, doesn't hold the same belief. For them, playing a Magic card is more important than owning it. These beliefs differ, but they both swirl around the basic fact of owning and manipulating these little pieces of cardboard. So in order to better understand Magic's relationship to class, let's try to understand just one card. Now, I'm not going to talk about paper stock and printing methods. All that information is readily available online. What I want to do instead is just walk you through some of my back-of-the-envelope math. Now, one of the companies that produces Magic cards is called Cartamundi. Cartamundi also sells custom playing cards directly to individuals. So I went on their website and I slid a slider all the way to the right. 1,000 decks, or about 50,000 cards, would run me 3,250 euros, or about $3,843.64. So about 8 cents per card. Seems cheap, but Wizards, being a big customer, probably receives a big discount. Let's say they receive 40% off. At that rate, what would Wizards pay to produce each year 4 standard legal sets? Based on one Redditor's estimation, Wizards prints about 2.5 billion cards per set. 4 standard legal sets, 10 billion cards per year. At that rate, Wizards would spend about $600 million, or about 15% of Hasbro's annual operating expenses, just to print each year's standard legal cards. That can't be right. Hasbro's a big fish. They've got to print Monopoly into the ground. They wouldn't spend 15% per year to prop up Oko Uro Omnath Standard. That's crazy. Okay, so let's say that Wizards receives an 80% discount. At that rate, they would pay $0.016 per card. Somewhere between this and this. In that case, Wizards would spend about $160 million a year to print 4 standard legal sets. And that's about 4% of Hasbro's annual operating expenses. Though that figure doesn't include the cost to move all those cards around, to market them, to organize Oko Uro Omnath Standard tournaments. So that figure is probably still high. So maybe each Magic card costs about this. Back to the anti-proxy and pro-proxy groups. The anti-proxy group prefers that people play only the cards they own. For a Grim Monolith, they would prefer that somebody spend about $250 to own this in order to play Commander. The pro-proxy group would rather turn this into this in order to play Commander. But let's remember that first principle of Vanguard and BlackRock, of Hasbro's owners. Ownership determines value. Now, this isn't an indictment. What I'm trying to say is that this logic, so common and fundamental to those in power, is also common in our thinking. What I'm saying is that we've been indoctrinated into believing that this logic is ours. In January of 2016, Elaine Chase, the Vice President of Global Brand Strategy and Marketing for Wizards, published an official statement on proxies, the relevant bit. A playtest card is most commonly a basic land with the name of a different card written on it with a marker. Playtest cards aren't trying to be reproductions of real Magic cards. They don't have official art, and they wouldn't even pass as the real thing under the most cursory glance. Fans use playtest cards to test out new deck ideas before building out a deck for real and bringing it to a sanctioned tournament. And that's perfectly fine with us. Wizards of the Coast has no desire to police playtest cards made for personal, non-commercial use, even if that usage takes place in a store. What we really care about is that DCI-sanctioned events use only authentic Magic cards and that we stop counterfeits. So this is a playtest card. Yet Elaine is also saying that, say, my Commander deck with this card in it isn't built for real. Yet in Commander, a social format defined by a rule that encourages discussing and agreeing on what'll be fun for everyone, I know plenty of people with cards like this in their decks. Yet I would say those decks are real. I mean, I know they were real. I played against them. We played many games. Some games were lost, some games were won, and everybody had fun. And my fun wasn't lessened by their use of these playtest cards or proxies or whatever you want to call them. In fact, in Commander, a social format, I want to see how creative and expressive my opponents can be. And in order to play opponents who express themselves differently, I need to play opponents who come from different backgrounds, who think differently because they've lived differently. I've got to play with people who won't or can't spend hundreds of dollars on something that a corporation produced for this. Women, LGBTQ folks, and BIPOC players for a long time have criticized Magic for being inaccessible to many people, and they're right. And part of those criticisms have to do with the game's cost. Because let's face it, when you play Magic for a little while, you are constantly tempted to throw down cash on cards. Because these cards are produced in order to stoke in us that feeling of fantasy, that desire for expression, and at the end of the day, that desire for ownership. Why else would Wizards produce so many sets, and secret layers, and premium products, and arena releases each year? They've got a responsibility to their owners to increase their capital, and to justify the logic of ownership. That's not their only responsibility, of course. They're also responsible for entertaining us, for attracting more players than they alienate, for keeping us hooked. And at the end of the day, we play Commander because we love the game. Maybe 10 people on the planet make a living playing and discussing Commander, but everybody else can pick it up or put it down whenever they'd like. Magic is a hobby. It's not a need. All those criticisms of Magic's accessibility point to the logic that keeps more players away from the game and away from the tables. And that logic is the logic of ownership. That logic says, this is mine. This isn't yours. Maybe surprisingly, the CEDH community is almost universally proxy friendly. Why? They want more ideas, more solutions, more creativity in the game they love. They want to play the player, not their wallet. That's an ethos that we as Commander players can adopt to enrich this format and its community. So go out there, proxy up that guy's Gradle, seize the means of production, and let's play. Thanks for watching.